I am not speaking. While he was living in Paris, the Austrian poet Rainer Maria Rilke wrote the following words. Is it possible that nothing true and important has been seen, recognized, or said? Is it possible to have had thousands of years' time to look, to think, and note down, and to have allowed these thousands of years to pass by like a school break in which you eat your sandwich and an apple? Yes, it is possible. Is it possible, in spite of inventions and progress, in spite of culture, religion, and worldly wisdom, to have remained on the surface? Is it possible to have covered the surface, which was still something at least, with some incredibly boring fabric, so it looks like the room furniture after the holidays? Yes, it is possible. Is it possible that the whole of world history has been misunderstood? Is it possible that the past is wrong? Yes, it is possible. Is it possible that all those people have incredibly precise knowledge of a past that never existed? Is it possible that all realities are meaningless for them, that their life is passing without connection to anything, like a clock in an empty room? Yes, it is possible. Rilke had an interest in the occult, though this is not often discussed. An interest which, over time, made the world feel strange, unfamiliar to him. Even terrifying at times. Being away from home probably didn't help either. We meet each other at a strange time in history. Every day the world seems to make less sense, purely rational frameworks perhaps no longer seeming up to the task of guiding us through it. The hope of progress that has persisted since the Enlightenment, though not without its challenges, has never appeared more frayed. An air of disillusionment seems to define our contemporary culture and politics. The power of modern technology to manipulate and falsify meanwhile, strains our ability to seek the truth. In this environment, it feels entirely natural to ask if there's something we have missed. Some greater truth buried in the passive knowledge our modern world is shaped around rejecting. You certainly wouldn't be the first to harbor this suspicion, to believe they're at least worthy of study, of being understood. This is what the study of the esoteric is concerned with, among other things. It's not a matter of belief. I'm not asking you to accept the stars may dictate fate or the immortality of the human soul. The schools of thinking we'll dive into are too many and varied to accept all of them wholesale in any case. I'm asking you to consider them and acknowledge the formative role they had in the history of science, philosophy, and science itself, society itself. Get ready to see the world at its strangest. That is a little script I had prepared. For about a week now. This was sort of just an intro I had, cribbing this particular little bit of poetry from Rilke. From here on out, it's going to be a lot less sort of lecturing. But I wanted to do this sort of an homage of some of the books that have led me to this point. If someone can give me an update on if that audio was good, before I sort of move forward. Because audio is great, thank you. I hope I didn't scare people off with that. Anyway. We're gonna get a little bit less mystical and just sort of go into the details. It's nice. Audio is fine for me. Awesome. I'm probably not coming off as confident as I'd like to, but let's quickly also. I'm on Twitch as well. Yeah, I am. And the chat box should be displaying Twitch chat. If only because I was less sure that wouldn't break. That looks cool as hell. It's a little bit... Okay, yeah, it's a little bit hard to see. But I can read it, and we can fix that later. I can fix it now. I can, And there we go. Zip effects. Okay. Reset the chat, but yeah. So let's move over here and let's move things over to the, I guess, pseudo main event here. Background is also probably what I'd live if I was a fantasy major in fantasy, but that's the idea. The text is still difficult to see. I don't know what to do about it. Might not update until I've changed that. That's fine though. We're gonna do a couple things. So we're gonna do changing the color or adding an outline. Yes. Magic stream, yeah. There, I need to lock the chat box. This is when the size properly, so we'll size it like this. Okay. So this is going to be an introduction both first to the kind of things I will be dealing with, generally in some of the more educational content to come, and then also me. Hello, Blue Ice Cubes. Thank you for the congratulations. This is, so we're going to start with, when I say esotericism, I've alluded to it a little bit. What does that actually mean? Often it's called, hello, Axion, thank you. Often it's called Western esotericism, because we are specifically dealing with a very Western current here. This doesn't encapsulate a lot of, what I guess you would call the East, because it's just, not that there was no interaction, but there's a very particular history here in regards to sort of progression with the development of cultures. Yeah. And as for the chat issue, I just don't have an immediate solution. I just don't have an immediate solution to that without actively fiddling with it, and I don't want to do that. So it's just Twitch chat right now. It's a little bit hard to see. I can read it though, and I have it all in front of me. So it's a complicated question. Esotericism is what you would call a second order and etic term. It's something that's applied back onto things. Or you could call it, like, you can think of it as like a post hoc category. Many of our definitions are incomplete or somehow problematic. But it deals with things like, he crawls a lot because of his last name. Yes. Although you spelled it wrong. It would be Crowley. It deals with things like sort of magic, mysticism, secret knowledge, sort of initiation into higher understandings and higher organizational orders along with that. So you can think of like Freemasonry. Secret teachings hidden in sort of popular religion, or mining on truth that is not apparently obvious out of religion that tells you the true nature of the universe, that sort of thing. And we'll get more into that as we go. But notably, there's not a single easy way to group esotericism, hence why I'm just kind of throwing terms out there. But there are some ideas. First big one comes from Antoine Favre, the founder in a lot of ways of the modern study of esotericism. he identifies traits, the first four being very crucial, the others being a little bit more optional. So ideas of correspondences. Things have relations to each other that are not obviously causal, is a common belief. So you can think of like plants having planetary aspects, or even the idea of like a zodiac sign. Living nature. There is the world is in some way alive. Imagination and meditations. This has to, and imagination and mediations. Imagination has to do with a lot of like vision, sort of seeking truth through like the mind, through what you see in like a vision. Mediations has to do with you are going to do you do that through an intermediary being. Like an angel would be a great example of that. And the experience of transmutation, transforming, becoming more pure. And then he has his secondary characteristics as well. Go back, please. But the problem is that this is a little bit limiting. There's plenty, like, he says that they should have all or most of at least these first four. And then the other two, concordance and transmission. Should have at least these four. I actually want to refresh. I might want to refresh myself on precisely what he means by concordance here. But I do have the book over there. I could do it. Transmission, of course, being the idea that there's a tradition that's been handed down over time. He refers to these last two as less necessary, but he seems to think these four are very important. These first four are very important, and that leaves us with a little bit of an incomplete picture. So Dame Frances Yates, another big innovator in the field. Her, in her various books, she lays out what she calls the Hermetic tradition. Secret transmissions of mystic knowledge in the pre-Enlightenment European milieu, often laying the groundwork for the Enlightenment through their skepticism towards traditional religious authorities and the sort of versatilianism that was very prominent at the time. That, and she sort of builds the idea of this secret network of occult knowledge. The problem is that history isn't quite that romantic. She's a little bit over, and she's we owe her a lot, but she was a little bit over enthusiastic, and she sort of implies a lot of very different people were doing similar things when that isn't necessarily true. And I think you really hit sort of that issue when you look at sort of the early Renaissance occultists and acting like they're in a very clear chain of transmission with someone like Jakob Böhme. But we'll get to that. The second definition is even more fanciful. The idea that we're looking for the ways that various people throughout history have grasped some true spiritual experience, some divinity, the way they've kind of reached out, like different people throughout history have reached out and touched something beyond themselves, and they have different ways of describing it. Where they tapped into some true power, or whatever way you want to word that. Often use sort of the Platonic language of the ineffable touching the true oneness of the world, and sort of giving and having different interpretations of it. The sort of idea of the blind man and the elephant, right? So this is obviously assumes that there is, this obviously sort of, the problems with this is it obviously assumes that there is something to see. It's inherently a spiritual way of looking at things. But it also discredits the individual beliefs a fair bit. Like a Christian mystic and a Sufi Muslim do not believe they are doing the same thing. They would not be okay with you insinuating that. So why do we assume why do we sort of take them as having certain wisdom, but then say no, you're wrong, when they then take the extra step of rejecting one another? There's a little bit of arbitrariness there, and it can feel a little bit patronizing to the actual people who believe a very particular thing to say that, to sort of act like we're honoring them by saying they grasp at truth while simultaneously implying that the lion's share of what they came upon was wrong. Then we have the sort of more common, more modern dialectic understanding of esotericism, where it's more of a way people have communicated. That's the sort of idea of secrecy, privilege, knowledge. You need to be initiated to learn the thing. You need to be initiated to learn the truth. And this can appear in magical contexts and non-magical contexts. Like, I think Hanegraaff in his Esotericism Western Culture book argues that the George W. Bush administration has a certain element of esotericism understood in this way, which I'd love to look into. But it's kind of something else. It's kind of a complete other thing. Like this is useful. This doesn't really... We're not really talking about the same thing anymore. And finally, one more definition. This is the one that I mostly ascribe to, but it's also just as flawed as any. This is Walter Hanegraaff's formulation of rejected knowledge. The post-enlightenment world is based on embracing rational and empirical principles and methods to the exclusion of other forms of knowledge that have been historically extremely prominent, even in the Enlightenment. Big example, of course, religious knowledge, religious transmission. But any sort of undemonstrable causation, which was always in some way taken for granted, would be another example. And he sort of uses this to create a functional definition of esotericism as various forms of science and philosophy that have historically been present in the Western world, but have been considered unserious or unworthy within the past 1 to 3 centuries, to the point where even studying them as wrong but an important influence has been kind of taboo and discouraged for about a century, for like a while now in modern academia. So this, and I think this is probably the best, but in terms of encapsulating a lot of the stuff that I'm actively interested in, but it's not quite intuitive. Like, you hear the word esotericism, this is not what pops into your brain, right? And there is a level of ideology there. He makes some very compelling arguments that about like the relation of rejecting sort of magical ways of thinking to what happened in the age of colonialism and things like that. That's something we can maybe dive into in a dedicated presentation. Let me quickly make sure my YouTube chat is still properly connected. Okay. But, like, okay, that's a lot of words. What is it actually? And speaking of words, it deals with some, like, I guess what you'd call crazy stuff. So, like, magic, mysticism, visions, angels and demons, secret truth and power, ritual practice, the power of stars and planets, the nature of the universe and, human souls, reincarnation, anything you can imagine, right? Hidden worlds, spirits, really deep in the supernatural. So, and so like that, like I can give all this sort of academic like definition debate, but that's, I think, what people seek out when they're interested in this stuff. So let's look at some ideas that are often considered under the esoteric umbrella. Neoplatonism, Gnosticism, Hermetism, these sort of 3 ways of thinking that rose to prominence in the very, very early Common Era, around the same time as Christianity was first being founded, actually. I want to go directly into each of them at some point in like different streams. Suffice it to say, these were these are sort of these are ways of thinking about the cosmos and divinity that sort of faded out, but have had sparks of interest throughout history and in their own ways been very influential. And I give them all quotations because they're all kind of problematic terms, but we'll get into that. Not problematic in a social justice sense. They cause problems. They obscure in some ways. Early Christianity, the development of ideas, Gnosticism is definitely a part of that. Astrology, astrological practice throughout history, the Jewish apocalyptic tradition, various beliefs that emerged in Jewish circles about the true nature of being. Like we're all very familiar with one. The Book of Revelations is very much in that tradition. And there's other stuff, like, of course, many of you have probably heard of the Book of Enoch, with its story of giants and angels taking human women and all that. But that's very much in the sort of very weird, expressive tradition with sort of journeys through heaven and the heavens, and the sort of secrets revealed that were very prominent around the time in the sort of Jewish world around the time Jesus started preaching. And the Kabbalah, which is sort of spawned from that, but it spawned much, much later, which is a sort of very dense, abstract sort of system of Jewish theology, I guess you can think of it, which we'll get into eventually. In other more modern currents, you have Islamic mysticism, which I'm still very much studying. The clerical necromantic underground. It's fine. You're totally fine, Claire. I'm happy if you're listening. The clerical necromantic underground. Priests attempting to practice magic in secret throughout the medieval times. Very fascinating stuff. Renaissance magic, a transformation in magic that occurred when many ancient texts found their way back to Rome. That tried to where these sort of new visionaries tried to reintegrate all these old sort of pagan ideas into Christianity. Incredibly fascinating time. Alchemy, this reinterpretation of certain Hermetic ideas and Islamic ideas, it should be said. Alchemy got its start as alchemia in the Islamic world. That interpreted various ideas from the Hermetic texts and Aristotle to this idea of transformation, transforming metals, transforming the inner self as well. The Rosicrucian manifestos are a crazy little story about these texts that started circulating, claiming to be from a secret order that was going to save the Christian world in the tumult of like the European wars of religion. This order likely did not exist, but it would eventually, because these manifestos inspired it. And you'll see all kinds of stuff like that throughout the history of esoteric thinking. Spiritual Freemasonry, the transformation of the Masonic orders into this sort of strange spiritual thinking that claimed to have roots in the Knights Templar. They didn't, but it's still interesting they thought of themselves that way. Mesmerism, hypnosis as a spiritual practice. And then other modern occult practices, like, which I'm still learning about, like Wicca, Thelema, the Golden Dawn, New Age, all that kind of stuff. Which is known for taking little bits of just about everything discussed here and more, and eventually some stuff from the Eastern side of things, and kind of mixing and matching them in these very sort of strange and different ways. Let's give a couple previews of a couple things we'll discuss here. Let's talk about early Hermetism a little bit. So these writings were circulating around Rome and Egypt in the early Common Era. Attributed to the legendary sage Hermes Trismegistus, who was often claimed to be much, much older than these writings actually were. Thrice great Hermes, as that translates to. A being who was supposed to have connections to the Egyptian god Thoth and all sorts of other things. You see ideas of how the universe is reflected from the composition of each individual human, this mix of material and spiritual, the material and spiritual, the macrocosm and the microcosm. And this process of which you can sort of reascend through the cosmos by shedding these spirits, these daimons that have attached to yourself, that attach to your soul on your way down, and achieve your sort of true purity. And this idea of pursuing purity would later heavily influence alchemical thinking as it was sort of applied to metals and the like. Another thing we'll talk about, Renaissance magic. In 1453, the Ottoman Empire captures Constantinople. Many flee west, carrying texts that have been from the ancient and Islamic world that have been preserved in its libraries. The works of Plato, the works often attributed to Hermes Trismegistus, many more. And they would be translated in Rome by individuals like Marsilio Ficino, who would himself pioneer his own sort of form of celestial magic, which is the beginning of ideas of like channeling the energies of the sun, which you see in a lot of New Age stuff. That begins with Ficino here. And sort of working off his writings, Giovanni Pico della Mirandola publishes 900 Theses, an attempt to syncretize all of this with Christianity and adding in the Kabbalah as well, which have started to be translated by Jewish converts. As he attempts to sort of create the one, he attempts to sort of find the one true religion by taking pieces from all these things. I actually have a copy of the 900 Theses right over there on the shelf beside me. But his ideas would be rejected, and his book would be the first to be officially banned by the Inquisition. His 900 Theses. This is Pico here, by the way. But this is all just a bunch of old shit. Why does it matter that some people thought that you could channel the energies of the sun, or that you needed to purify your spirit of celestial diamonds to reascend? What does any of this mean for us? This is just like old superstition, right? It doesn't affect it. We're in a sort of more enriched age. Well, first of all, it affected our history. Paracelsus is probably one of the most influential European writers on alchemy in the West. And he begins to moved Europe away from the humors-based approach to medicine of Galen, laying the foundation for modern chemistry and modern medicine as he did so. He's the founder of what we call homeopathic medicine, which is not as effective as what we have today, but was miles better than leeching, right, or anything like that. I would also mention Johann Weyer. Johann Weyer was a pupil of the noted sort of early modern occultist Cornelius Agrippa, whose books I also have over there. He, in challenging the witch trials, wrote a book called... He was against the witch trials of his time, and he wrote a book called On the Trickery of Demons, where he defines a condition. He argues that many of these women were simply suffering from this blanket term for a lot of mental illness stuff that he just calls melancholia. And this is huge. I think Sigmund Freud described it as like one of the most important texts in like human history. Because this is in many ways the beginning of modern mental health practice. I'll also mention René Descartes, the sort of founder of philosophical rationalism. And he claims that this is everything he did. If you look at Descartes' works, he seems to be kind of sort of attempting and reattempting to articulate what he's getting at. Like he doesn't seem to just move on to new topics. He seems to kind of try again with each of his like more notable works in a lot of ways. This is apparently because the whole sort of rationalist project was built on a dream he had. He was visited by some, I guess, sort of heavenly entity. So that's fascinating. So this there's whether or not it is actual the mystic core of it is true, it is nevertheless influential. It also affects today. According to Gallup, 1/3 of Americans are open to the supernatural. Nearly half believe in some form of psychic or spiritual healing. It's a little bit debatable whether this stuff is esoteric. It's actually very sort of on its face in a lot of ways. But nevertheless, modern political climate was notably influenced by QAnon, a conspiracy narrative with an apocalyptic edge. Not all conspiracy theories are esoteric, but a lot of them do take on an esoteric dimension. And Q, with its ideas of the storm and all that, there's an element of chosen fewness here in there that is more spiritual than it sometimes seems. I also mentioned within Silicon Valley, in AI circles, language such as Antichrist and Eschaton are very, very common if you're tuned in. Eschaton being the sort of final battle of good and evil in Revelation, in the Book of Revelations. So you see a lot of this mystical language. One notable OpenAI employee, Rune, if you're familiar with him, has talked about how the future will be shaped by magical thinking over reasoning. So there's people doing influential stuff who are like thinking in not in like kind of vaguely spiritual terms, right? Like even not even beyond normal religion. And then finally, let's just indulge. What if it's true? Society built upon a rejection of the irrational was never a guaranteed thing. That was an ideological project. One that was in many ways Protestant. And we can go into the history of that as well. It's like the idea of sort of true philosophy in a rational... That's the idea that there's like a truer philosophy, and that's the rational stuff. That's the rational philosophy, and then there's sort of mysticism, which is sort of old and dated and eventually primitive and non-European. You see how certain ideas become harmful there. But this was a project that sort of stemmed directly from the Protestant project of sort of declaring themselves the true Christianity and a lot of the tenets of Catholicism and the like as pagan. Like you can see a direct continuity between these two projects of Protestantism branding other religions, other forms of Christianity as infected by paganism, and certain forms of early rationalist philosophy decrying esoteric practices as well, also pagan. So it may, in that way, be worth re-examining. Hello, Bella. I don't believe it's entirely right to dismiss the possibility of truth being found in the irrational. In that sense, we are not on some inevitable march of history towards more rationalism, more empiricism. I don't think we should behave as such. Anyway, that's the freaky stuff done. Let's talk a little bit about me. And we're gonna get a lot less formal now. And actually, now that I don't need to hold my train of thought as much, turn the music up just slightly. Might be too much though. All right, it's still quite low. Hello, Bella. So, who am I actually? Who am I in all this, and who am I in general? Well, Rudolph Ambrose, pronouns he, him. I forgot to add this, but birthday March 4th. I'm very much an amateur student of the esoteric. It's not easy to actually study these things in an academic context. There's a program at Amsterdam, one at Exeter, and I believe there's one more, which I don't have access to any of those institutions. I have been Rudolph for about 4 years now, but I haven't really had a ton of direction until fairly recently. What do I actually enjoy doing on my own time? I like 40k with an asterisk instead of a comma, apparently. Whoops. Books, tabletop. I tweet about it a fair bit, so my account might be the most focused. I'm also big into Trent Crusade, another tabletop game. I'm big into like finding new music. I used to do, if you look back at my YouTube shorts, you'll find some old album reviews. And I do occasionally still write about music. And then I also am a writer. I have like short horror stories. They're up on my Reddit. I'm heavily influenced by horror podcast The Magnus Archives, which took over my life for about a year and a half back in 2021-ish. Still kind of does from time to time. That's about it. Anyway, video games. I play a lot of roguelikes. Latro, Slay Spire 2, Clever Pit. I play a lot of retro FPS. I play a fair amount of Stellaris. And recently I've been playing more story games on the channel. We still got that Disco Elysium playthrough we're doing. And that's probably a lot of what's going to end up on the YouTube, is some of the more story-oriented stuff. Music. I listen to fucking too much music. I have an album of the year page. I don't use it that much anymore. I might get back into it. But just like a few things I've looked at over time. This is like every sort of genre. So I have like a Aesop Rock, who's my all-time favorite rapper. Panopticon's black metal, Epica, Blind Guardian, or sort of power symphonic metal. I have Mars Volta here. It kept the guy in the background. Why did it do that? That's not part of the logo. I don't think it looks bad actually, but that's just part of the template. Whatever. Mars Volta, probably my favorite band of all time, and then even has some country here in the bottom. Other things. I play tabletop. 100 Girlfriends manga. You wouldn't think it, right? But I also tweet about it a lot. And the new season started like 2 days ago. I'm still following that. And then Umineko is technically a video game, but come on. There's much said about how if you watch it, if you read it, it'll take over your life, and that remains true for me. I guess there's other things too. I don't like seek out new anime that much anymore, but I am interested in maybe doing it in the near future. But other than that, I'm reading a lot of stuff. I'm reading a lot of Warhammer stuff in my off time, and in my on time, I'm reading a lot of stuff related to the field I'm trying to emerge into and educate on. Housekeeping. Streams from here on out, maybe not this week, but streams will be every Monday and Thursday. There will be some educational stuff. Friend Dungeon Mesh, maybe could go and check out Dungeon Mesh for sure. Yeah. Just not a ton of It's hard for me to sit down and watch a show a lot of the time, but I should do more. Streams every Monday and Thursday from here on out. That will include some educational stuff in the style of the first 2/3 of this presentation, but it will also, I'll still be playing a lot of video. A lot of that stuff will be Twitch only. And shortly after I'm done with this stream, everything's gonna start updating, so you'll be able to, I'll have my card posted on stuff rather than just a few links. Like all the branding is gonna sort of update over, like throughout the night as soon as the stream's over. But we're definitely not always going to be on top. I'm definitely just going to play some stuff because it seems neat. But I'm always going to be trying to take questions. If anyone's interested in this, if anyone's interested in subject related to this. So just some credits. This is not like a proper bibliography. Just some stuff. Thank you to Dr. Justin Sledge of Esoterica and Earl Fontanelle of the Secret History of Western Esotericism podcast, or the SHWEP. Both of these individuals have been major sort of sources in mine. I'm sure many others journey into the subject. Dr. Sledge hit 1 million subs not that long ago. So I can't act like he's some secret I'm uniquely privy to anymore. The two books that I read sort of moving into this were Water Honographs. esotericism, Western culture, counternormativity, and rejected knowledge. And then Nicholas Goodrick Clark's the Western Nicholas Goodrick Clark, Jesus, Clark's the Western Esoteric Traditions. These are the two main books that sort of pushed me into, that sort of didn't push me into, but sort of helped me build the basis for what I was actually going to talk about today, and get me to a level where I feel like I can even call myself an amateur. I think there's a lot in those two. Honograph is more of a project. Clark is more of just a historical sort of summary of things. Either way, I do recommend both. Other inspirations. I want to say, there's a couple of philosophy folks that either are here or were here. You guys were a big inspiration in me embracing this particular branding. In the sense that it was I felt like I had something a little bit different to add to certain conversations. And it's also just sort of the culmination of me attempting to differentiate myself a little bit. And I also want to think of, there's like other educational VTubers. It seems like a lot more have propped up over the past couple of years or so. That'd be individuals like Phage or Sarah or Syzygy Altair. People like that, right? You sort of pushed me into a direction where I'm embracing this. And it's the reason I have ceased to be quite as armchair too. It's the reason I bought a bunch of books about it and stuff, and I've been reading them. Because I felt like I wanted to actually be able to represent this. And then I want to mention Hollister Zian, who were probably the reason I began streaming 4 years ago. Incredibly creative bunch of guys. Maybe a very different sort of thing than this, but they still deserve the mention. And then proper credits. My model is by Rizzy PM. Yeah. My model is by Rizzy PM. It was rigged by Norbert Hills. Background is by Rika Studio, and two individuals from Rika Studio, Azazel, HD, and them. The stream overlays were by Hoshi, and taping made let me oh no, you can see my tabs, how bad. You actually can't. Tape made this image. Alright, well, before we conclude anything fully, I guess, just to sort of show you a little bit of Rizzy and Nobert's work, it wouldn't be fair to not, I don't think. There's a few things I can do. Oh, okay. I thought this expression didn't exist, but that's cool. I have the normal version. I have angry but silly. This just has tears for some reason. It's a shame. And indeed, there's one more. I need to just remember the... Okay, that's a little weird. It seems like my sort of more involved smile expression didn't seem to be around, but that's fine. I can just, I still just have the original import. I can look into that later. I do have some other toggles, though. The rune here, which is one of Cornelius Agrippa's sigils of Saturn, as happens. That's not always there. I wanted to start with it off, actually, but I forgot about it. The vest comes off, and the brooch. So I wasn't sure if I liked the brooch that much. I think I like it, though. I think I like it quite a bit. That, though, I think is about all. Unless there's anything important I haven't mentioned. I think we'll be concluding here, the short 1 hour thing. But before that, I have just a message for you. I need to go grab it. Oh! Okay, fuck. I'd feel really bad not mentioning this. I meant to mention it while I had the credits page open. A good chunk of that intro speech was basically cribbed from Hanegraaff, from Walter Hanegraaff's rejected knowledge in Western culture, counter-normativity and rejected knowledge in Western culture. Like it was his idea to open with that Big Rilke quote that is pulled directly from that book. I wanted to mention that. I would feel really bad if that wasn't in here. But anyway. Speaking of cribbing directly from Hanegraaff, he ends his book with a quote I haven't been able to find anywhere else, but which just has sort of mystified me for a long minute. It seems like he's quoting something, but it's something quite, but I want to sort of end it on there because I think it makes a great point of just how strange and different the world is and how limited our view of it might be. And that's the note I'm choosing to conclude on. So just remember, it could all be different. It already is different. Just look at what's there.